When you hear the name Peter, you can think of a lot of great things that Peter did. He was definitely a leader for the early church. He wrote the book of 1 Peter. He wrote the book of 2 Peter. But did you know he needed a second chance? Because there was a night in his life when he blew it royal. People were asking him, do you know Christ? And once, and then twice, and then 3 times, he denied that he even knew Jesus. He had to have a second chance. And when he took it, great things happened. And then you all know King David, the best king Israel ever had. Brought to them great power, brought to them great wealth. God used him to write most of the Psalms. But did you know David needed a second chance? Because there was a night when he looked upon a woman named Bathsheba and lusted for her, and ended up taking Bathsheba as his wife and having her husband Uriah set up to be killed. David needed a second chance, and God gave it to him. You all know the name Moses. You think, well, Moses led the people out of Hebrews out of Egypt and into the promised land, and he wrote Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. How could Moses have done anything majorly wrong? Did you know there was a day when Moses got angry at one of the Egyptians and killed him and buried his body in the sand and then took off running to avoid the consequences of the murder that he committed? But God gave him a second chance. And then, of course, we know about Jonah, who we're studying, a prophet of God, who when told to go and speak, he ran the other direction, and God gave him a second chance. When he did, good things happened. Might be somebody here today or sometime in your life, you're going to say, I just feel like I need a new start. I need a second chance. Take it, because good things are going to happen. I want to begin with this quote that you'll see on the screen. It says, I've become convinced that God thoroughly enjoys fixing and saving things that are broken. And that means no matter how hurt and defeated you feel, no matter how badly you've been damaged, God can repair you. God can give anyone a second chance. Isn't it good to know that God's not one and done? Do it right the first time or you're out of here. But that he offers a second chance. And of course, Jonah chapter 2 ended with these words, the Lord commanded the fish and vomited Jonah onto dry land. And then chapter 3, verse 1, the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Jonah's second chance. We're going to follow through this 3rd chapter, and we're going to see 3 great things that happened in Jonah's life. 3 great ways that God used him after he took his second chance. Just as a reminder, if you're here and you're saying, I need a fresh start. What can God do with me? He can do any of these 3 things and all of these 3 things. Here's the first one. When Jonah took his second chance, he became a voice for God. A voice for God. God could take anybody here and use you to speak to somebody else. You might say, but I am terrible at speaking. My mouth shuts down whenever I feel like I want to tell somebody about God. God can use you. So God goes to Jonah, tells him to go to Nineveh. He runs the opposite direction. God brings him back to dry land, gives him this second chance in Jonah chapter 3 and verse 1, tells him in verse 2, go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message that I've given you. And verse 3, Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord. He went to Nineveh. Nineveh was a very large city. It took 3 days to go through it. And Jonah began by going a day's journey into the city and proclaiming, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. Jonah didn't want to say a word to the Ninevites, but God gave him a second chance. And he's proclaiming to the whole city. Now, we just read that it's a great city, a large city, a city 3 days across. Just to give you an idea of how many people are in this city, take a look at Jonah chapter 4 and verse 11. to let you know how many people are listening to Jonah's voice. And here's what it says. Jonah 4, verse 11. Should I not have concern for that great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left? In other words, just in that city, there's 120,000 small children who can't tell their right hand from their left hand. 120,000 little ones. So there's probably 120,000 medium ones, and 120,000 teenagers, and 120,000 sets of parents, and of course the elderly. This could be a city that has somewhere close to 1 million people. That's pretty intimidating. But God says, Jonah, you go into that city, you deliver my message, and he goes and he begins to walk through this city, and his voice is heard. One person got a second chance, and all of a sudden, as we're going to continue reading, people who never considered their life before God are finally considering their life. Remember, this was a wicked city. It was a violent city, and when Jonah walks into it, his message to them is 40 more days, and Nineveh is going to be overthrown. He begins to bring them a message of judgment. Have you ever noticed there are times when people might not listen to too much about God? They're not interested until they get challenged with the fact that, do you know, one day you're going to be judged by God. One day, there's a day coming that you're going to stand before God. What are you going to say? And it's that message many times of judgment that gets through to people. And that was the message that Jonah delivered. And that was the message that began to impact that whole entire city. You know, even God's people had to be reminded of Judgment Day. There was a prophet named Amos. And Amos talked to the land of Israel, and he gave them these words: prepare to meet your God. Right? We can kind of get ill-prepared. We get so busy with life, we don't think about it. So the prophet comes out and says, prepare to meet God. There's a story about somebody you probably have heard of, Billy Graham, right? Anybody hear of Billy Graham? He had a son, Franklin Graham. And you would have expected that Franklin, his son, would have grown up and just been the nicest little boy and listened to Daddy all the time and been the nice little church boy. But evidently the story of Franklin Graham is a story of a guy who needs a second chance. And when he gets a second chance, then he becomes a voice. Here's what I read. The preacher's boy grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, but being the son of the foremost evangelist didn't impress him much. As a youngster, Franklin said he was not attracted to the gospel. He wanted guns, motorcycles, cigarettes, and alcohol. He was thrown out of high school and then thrown out of college. Franklin said, I wanted to be a hellraiser that lived my own life. And if it made people mad, tough. If it disappointed people, tough. Because it's my life. I'm going to live it the way I want to live it. And if you don't like it, get out of my way. And that was my attitude, and it was rebellion against God, he said. I wanted to be free, and I wanted to have fun. Finally, at the age of 22, his father, Billy, gave him a choice. He looked at me, and he said, Franklin, your mother and I sense that there's a struggle for the soul of your life, and there's no halfway. Either you're going to have to accept Jesus Christ and what he says and obey him and follow him, or you're going to have to reject him. There is no middle ground. And Franklin said, I then accepted Jesus Christ. And you know what happened? Now he's a voice, right? Before he was saying, all I want is to drink and party and ride motorcycles and do what I want to do. And all of a sudden, when God got a hold of him and he got a second chance, he's become an incredible voice in the world. So, second chance, it leads to God opening up doors. Talking to people you never thought you'd talk to, and God will use you. Secondly, Jonah began to influence people. I mean, really influence them. If you look at Jonah chapter 3, verse 5, the Ninevites believed God. A fast was proclaimed. And all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. When Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, he rose off of his throne, he took off his royal robes, he covered himself with sackcloth, and he sat down in the dust. And this was the proclamation that he issued to Nineveh. By the decree of the king and his nobles, do not let people or animals or herds or flocks taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink, but let the people and the animals be covered with sackcloth. Let everyone call urgently on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence. Who knows? God may yet relent and have compassion and turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish. This was a bad city. In Jonah chapter 1, it's described this way. The wickedness of Nineveh rose up to heaven. That's pretty deep. When you got wickedness that makes it from earth to heaven, and God's saying, this place is so bad, I have a solution. I'm going to just destroy it in 40 days. So that's the condition that they were in until one man, right there, one man made one visit. You think, how can that be? How can one man making one visit to one horrible city make such a difference? Because God was all over him. The power of God was now on Jonah's life, and it was God's message, and he began to influence people. This city experienced a real and deep experience with God. In my Bible, I underline this. The first words of verse 5. This is what caught my attention. The Ninevites believed God. I thought, wait a minute. Are they listening to Jonah? It doesn't say they believed Jonah. It said what? They believed God. Because whose message was Jonah delivering? It was God's message. Jonah wasn't saying, I'm going to destroy your city. You're going to be taken over. He's saying, this is a message. I'm a prophet of God. This is a message from God. And he is influencing people. And the Ninevites believed God. You can see how sincere they are. First of all, in verse 5, they proclaim a fast. A fast was proclaimed. We have a natural desire to eat and to drink. What are we going to do as soon as we leave this building? Right? We're heading to the lunch table. And then a few hours from now, we'll be over in the fellowship hall. We'll be enjoying a celebration over there. And then before bed, we'll be eating again. We have this natural desire to eat. And when you push aside food, and you begin to fast, and you say, I'm pushing aside this natural physical desire that I might focus on that which is spiritual. That's a fast. And so they are pushing aside food that they might give their attention now to the message that Jonah delivered them. And not only that, it says that they put on sackcloth. They put on sackcloth. Evidently, sackcloth was a public and a symbolic way of showing repentance and humility. When you take and clothe yourself, not in your royal robes or your everyday clothes, but old, rough, black goat skin and goat hair. And you wrap yourself in this dark, dirty, uncomfortable gown. What you're saying is, Lord, I'm not as pretty as I thought I was. My heart is dark and my heart is dirty, and you see me for what I really am, and the best way that I can kind of communicate my message from earth to heaven to show you that I see now what's going on in my heart and how dark and dirty it is to cover myself up with this dark and dirty goat hair. And so they're trying to show their repentance and their humility before God by putting on this rough sackcloth. And it all started because Jonah got a second chance. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time and said, go to Nineveh. And that time he went. And because he went, all of a sudden he is beginning to take God's message and influence people in a city that was known as being wicked. What are they doing now? Now they're all worshiping. Now they're all broken and humble before God and covered in sackcloth. They went from wickedness to worship. And this very well could be the biggest revival in history. Because I've never heard of another city where the leader of the city and everybody else under him, all the way through the people, decided they were going to take off their nice soft garments and put on sackcloth and beg God for mercy. So he is influencing people. Jonah's leading in the greatest revival perhaps in world history. Take God up on a second chance. All of a sudden, you're going to have a voice for God. You're going to find yourself having open doors to speak for him. Take God up on a second chance, and you're going to start influencing people for God, just like Jonah did. And thirdly, your life, like Jonah's, is going to become a spotlight on God. God's going to get the glory as you begin to serve him. So we find here now, verse 10, Jonah 3:10, when God saw what they, the Ninevites, did, and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction that he had threatened. So we have a city that totally ignores God, that's known for wickedness and violence, and one prophet walks in and takes the spotlight and shines it on God and tells the people, you're going to be destroyed. It's coming. And so he puts the spotlight on God, and they move from being wicked and from being violent to begging for mercy, begging God to forgive them and to relent and to not bring on them the destruction, because Jonah put the spotlight on God and what God was doing. So a city that ignored God changed their ways when Jonah brought that spotlight and turned it and said, you got to look and see what's going to happen to you. And so God, it says in verse 10, relented and did not bring on them the destruction that he threatened. See, God is pleased to show compassion. Right? The God of the Bible is not a God who is thrilled with destroying cities for their wickedness. He'd much rather have them turn and live. We find that a couple times in Ezekiel, where it says statements like this. God says, do I have any pleasure in the death of the wicked, declares the Lord, and not rather that he should turn from his way and live. I don't know about you, but there's times when I've heard of people who've done horrible things, and I don't say, I wish they would turn to God and live. You know what I say? I hope they get what they deserve. You hear some things, and you just want judgment to come and justice to fall, and God says, why don't they turn and live? Again, Ezekiel 33, it says, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked would turn from his way and live. Turn from your evil ways, for why will you die? God gets glory and pleasure in saving souls. He gets glory and pleasure when the wicked turn, and he's able to show them forgiveness and compassion. And it happened on this day to many, many thousands upon thousands of people because of one man, Jonah, who walked in a very dark city and took the spotlight and shined it on God. And when they got a glimpse of God, we find their hearts breaking and we find them begging for mercy. So, a voice and an influence and a spotlight. That's how God can use each and every one of us. So this is the challenge. We know Jonah's story. We know what happened to him. He got a second chance. He became a voice. He got a second chance. He became an influence. He got a second chance, and he took the spotlight on God. So the question today is not really about Jonah. It's about us. Do we need a second chance? Is there anything going on in our hearts that say, Lord, I'm not content with where I am. I know I need to be better for you. Give me a second chance. Help me, Lord, to be the voice. Help me to be the influence. Help me, God, to shine the spotlight on you. Well, Jonah's life began to turn last chapter when it said, and Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. That's where it starts. And so we're going to have a song in just a moment. If you're sitting here and you're saying, I just need a second chance to be a stronger voice and a stronger influence and shine the light brighter, even as we sing this song, just come right on up here, kneel down, even right where you're at, and you just pray.